those engagements. And then if you haven't already, please sign up. Here's a QR code that makes things a little easier. Or you could just click the link in the Zoom chat. And then moving on, I know I wasn't here last year, so I apologize for that. But I can finally introduce myself. I'm Anthony. I'm a master's student for the information security program here at Cal Poly. I put Unk in there because I'm a bit older, but yeah. Currently, I'm a SOC analyst intern at SoFi here in San Francisco. Um, a little bit more about me and my background with like competitions. Last year, I was a threat hunter on CCDC, and I'll be the same thing this year. Threat hunter as well. And then last year for CPTC, I was on the Windows side of things. And then this year, I'll be captain.
My name's, wait, can you hear me? Hello?
Yep. Okay, you're
All
good.
right, cool. Yeah, my name is Roberto Castro, and I'm a computer engineering major. I'm a software engineer at a company called STR, and I've done security engineering at a company that does incident response for like emergency services at Folsam. And in 2024, 2025, I was captain for NCAE, if you're familiar with that competition. And then for CPTC, I was the web person this previous year, and this upcoming year I'll be web and AI.
Moving on, we have kind of the schedule here for this summer. We're currently on week two, which is, like I mentioned before, intro to pen testing. Next weekend, we'll be covering web applications. Then following that would be Linux and Windows. Then, like the business side of things or consulting. And then we finally have our tryouts on the 22nd and 23rd of August. And
All right,
going,
and then I guess I'll go over the agenda from now on. So, yeah, for the agenda, we're going to go over careers in offensive security. And then second off, we'll be going over virtual machines and networking. And then third, pen testing methodology. And then ending, we'll have a lab that you guys can complete. There'll be like multiple options you could choose. Next slide. And so careers in offensive security, there's penetration testing, there's red teaming, there's vulnerability research, there's bug bounty hunting, and there's tool development. So note about penetration testing and red teaming, those two often get mixed up. Penetration testing is just purely the technical side. We're doing the actual like what people would consider hacking, and then red teaming involves some other stuff that could involve like a physical engagement where you're going in person, social engineering, a bunch of other stuff, but those two often get mixed up. And we can go next slide. So how are we different from the bad guys here? So there's a few things. There's consent, laws, ethics, and communication. And then, like it says, the bottom line, we help to protect people and organizations. And those often have multiple things that go under each of those words themselves, and we'll get into those. Yep. So what is the best way to get started? So what you can do is go to self-study, join clubs, attend trainings, attend competitions, get certifications, look for internships. We'll go over some of these, and then clubs like Swift obviously are here, so that's a good thing. And then attend trainings, which also is here. And then for competitions, let me turn my camera actually. So for competitions, of course, there's NCE, which I was in. That's a beginner one. So if you don't end up getting in this in CCDC or CPTC, you can do either Cyberforce or NCE in the fall. And then certifications we'll go over, and then internships, we could probably do a Q&A session if you guys wanted some tips, I guess, what people in the comp team do for those. And then don't, yeah, just attending classes and not being proactive is, of course, not good. And then expecting everything to be taught to you isn't good because usually, especially in cyber, if you're not proactive, people will just let you coast, or especially, yeah, yourself, you'll just coast. And then expecting like instant gratification. I mean, with AI, of course, there's lots of things they could do instantly, but the mindset that you develop when you just prompt away brainlessly, it's probably in the future gonna have some lasting side effects. So you gotta not try to take the easiest route most of the time, but it just depends on what your goals are. And then expecting easy money, yeah, there's a lot of like, I guess you could say courses being sold or just like expecting you to get money right off the bat, maybe like within a few months, which is possible, but you just don't go in with a mindset like this is going to be a 1 month thing. And then, yeah, just don't give up. Just always keep like learning. And you sort of have to enjoy learning because if you're going to go into cybersecurity or anything in the offensive security side, you're going to have to learn for pretty much the entire time you're working in this side of cyber. And then which learning materials are the best? We have a few platforms on here, and I'll mention some after that aren't mentioned. So TryHackMe, of course, is probably one of the most well-known beginner ones. And then for web security, Portswigger is pretty much regarded as the best platform. And then Hack the Box, there's, of course, I think everyone knows what this is, but on Hack the Box, there's like these machines that you can hack into, and then there's some write-ups you can follow, or you can just go into that. And then there's also an Academy version where it's sort of like TryHackMe. I would say that it's, you could say a little bit more advanced for some topics, but they're, in my opinion, pretty good. And then another thing that's not on here, Pwn College, pwn.college. If you want to look into that, that's another resource that's not mentioned here. That's pretty good. And then what certifications can help? We've put four here. I won't name them out, but you can look into these. These are pretty good for offensive security. And there's, for some of them, like OCP, there's other related certs from offensive security, which is the company. And for Hack the Box, there's CPTS here, which is like their general pen testing cert, but they also have some others that are related to that. And then we're moving on to virtual machines and networking. And then for virtual machines, what is a virtual machine? And then it should be on the next slide. There's some stuff. Yeah, so virtual machines and hypervisors, it's just basically a simulated computer. And in that simulated computer, it has like its own IP address, and I think its own namespace. And then for the hypervisor, its example of this would be like VirtualBox or VMware. And then if you go to the next slide, there should be like some use cases. Why a VM? Well, if there's some outdated software that you wanted to run on it or application testing that you want to like test an application to launch, run different operating systems that maybe you wanted to like test if you want to use it for something. And then of course, anything with lab environments, you would definitely want to run that. And then Kali, this is a like dedicated workspace for you to do penetration testing. This just basically has a bunch of pre-installed tools. It's built off of Debian, and then you can just right off the bat open tools such as like Nmap, MS, what is it, Metasploit, or any other the tools that you can explore yourself once you open this distro. And then moving on to networking, we have the client and server model. And then so we have the client, which of course makes a request, and the server, which is like a group of computers that will just handle whatever request that's being sent from the client. And then the client server model, here we have an example of Apache. And then you see the legend here, which is outgoing. And then once that connection is established, the server has a way of communication. And there's different protocols of communicating between your client and server that I think should be covered somewhere other in this slide. And then we have ports and network connections. So how the port is connected at a network level. We see an example here of a TCP connection. This is protocol. There's this one establishes a connection, and then I'm not sure, but there should be UDP is another example, of course, that just sends out packets without uh, listening for a response. Say here we just see one port sending to like what would looks like a web server, and then here we have it listening for an incoming connection, and then we see once it establishes the connection, it should start communicating. And next slide. And then shells, so we're going to go over different types of connections that an attacker can use to talk to like server, another machine, or victim or whatever. So we have a reverse shell and we have a bind shell. Reverse shell is when like you drop a payload and it actively connects back to your machine, and the bind shell is when it's like an open port on the victim's machine and it's waiting for you to send a request to connect to it, and then both of them establish a connection in the end. Actually. And then we should have a demonstration of reverse shell if you want to play that. And then we'll send out these slides because it's probably not the best quality and you might not understand what's going on at first. So yeah, all these slides will be sent out. That actually should be on our website. CPP Cyber, that was sent out in the chat if anyone wants to send that. All right, then we can move on. And then here we just have the differences between the firewalls. So we got a host-based firewall, a network-based firewall, and then a host-based firewall, of course, sits on like your host. So it's like your laptop, for example. And like this would be using like resources on your computer to run. And then the example would be like NetFilter, or even like built-in antiviruses should have host-based firewalls, or even just like things such as Windows Defender. And then network-based should regulate network traffic going through the network, and then that would just be like on your router or whatever you're connected to at the moment. And then example would be like Cisco ASA firewall. And then we have an example of how a firewall would work here. And I guess there's not too much explaining to do here, but as you can see, there's like computer, what looks to be like would be some sort of router, and then the firewall itself, and then for there you'd have like a database, and then you see that the attacker, the firewall, would block access directly if it didn't meet the criteria set up by the firewall. And then I think this should be you, Anthony.
So next we'll be covering like some of the fundamentals of pen testing. This visual is kind of like a bloated version or like a more general version, I would say, but it does have some bloat. So we do have a simplified version of this, but these are some of the common things you might see when looking into like pen test methodologies, or sometimes they call it kill chain. So this is our version of the simplified kill chain. First, we have our reconnaissance, which is basically trying to gather as much information on your target as possible. So this can be done through things like passive reconnaissance, whether that be like open source intelligence, kind of looking through maybe social medias or your targets, maybe GitHub, looking for credentials there. Next, we have exploitation, which is actually getting access to whatever your target may be, whether that be like some sort of web server. That exploitation might be getting some remote code execution on that backend web server. And then following that would be your post exploitation stage. So this is when you're logged in as, a normal user, low privilege, and you're trying to, escalate those privileges to admin or root. And then finally we have lateral movement, and this will be sort of like trying to figure out ways to get onto another machine within the network, or you can move laterally through users. Um, but yeah, trying to traverse your way through the network to full compromise. As I mentioned before, we have like passive reconnaissance and open source intelligence. On the bottom left, we have a visual of kind of like the OSINT framework, and we'll cover that in the following slides. And then some of your active recon might be Nmap. Nmap is really good because it gives you a lot of information when you're first kind of poking through and trying to figure out what exactly your attack surface is. And then when you're dealing with websites, you're looking at also directory enumeration and subdomain enumeration. So these can be different parts of the website with directory enumeration. And you might find, other web pages that might be useful that or might be exploitable. And then subdomain is similar, but it'll actually be kind of like another website connected to that parent domain website. And then we'll also go over that in the next slides. So passive recon, and then we have a link here on the bottom right for the OSINT framework, and you can kind of go through this yourself and kind of look through it and kind of have everything in one place. But for passive recon, some things we start out looking for is like IP addresses, and then domain names, what subdomains are there, uh, what domains are associated with the target, IP addresses, websites. And then for the second little column here, we have employee social media. Like I mentioned before, some employees may not be very tech savvy and may have the potential of leaking some information that they're not supposed to. Sometimes you can find usernames where you can go and try and brute force those usernames against whatever target machine you're trying to get into. Phone numbers, email addresses, and compromised credentials. Uh, this can be, obtained through maybe well-crafted phishing, whether you call somebody and do like a vishing kind of attack and try to get information there, or your classic phishing email address or email to send out to the email addresses that you've collected. Another thing is like hours of business, kind of trying to blend in if you were to get on that network. And then some of the culture and language. So trying to blend in if you're on like a red team engagement, um, and kind of trying not to get caught and detected. Is it- is- And then lastly, we have some third-party softwares that can be exploitable. Kind of figuring out if your target is using a third-party software that you're aware of that's exploitable, or it just really increases your attack surface. Moving on, we have Google Dorking. Um, I think this is pretty cool. It's a really powerful tool to kind of get Google to give you exactly what you want, because a lot of times when you're making a Google search, you kind of do get a lot of bloat, and it might not be exactly what you're looking for, and sometimes it can be unrelated things, and you kind of have to comb through and look for specifics of what exactly it is you're looking for. So like here, the first one, you can kind of narrow down your search to a specific site. So whether you're looking for social media pages on like say LinkedIn or maybe like Instagram or something, you can kind of dial down on a specific website that you want to gather information from. Another good one would be like GitHub if you're looking through maybe like accidentally push credentials, and then you're kind of looking through that commit history. And then file type, if you need a specific file type. I think this one can be useful for outside of even just penetration testing. Like if you're looking for like a specific PDF for school or some research project that you're doing. At This is good for like looking for social media usernames. Um, and then quoted text, I think this one is the one I probably use the most. This it's kind of like you put in the exact string you're looking for in quotes, and it won't return anything unless that exact string comes back as a match. And then we'll have some examples on the next slide. And then after and before time, this kind of narrows down the time frame of the search you're looking to do. Um, and I mean, that basically explains itself. And then plus, minus, and or are kind of like query things. You can exclude things that you don't want to pop up in your search, or you can do, for example, like a quoted text or a different type of like quoted string. And then, yeah, here would be an example of this. Um, Here we have, this is an example from a previous CPTC engagement. So we have the cozy croissant or the cozy croissant in one, kind of no spaces. And then that kind of returns some of the information. And then we see Ellen here. So that's pretty useful. Those are different use cases. There's probably more other use cases um, that you can use this for, but this is just the specific example we are having. And then next would be domain names and IP addresses. Um, if you look up like a certain domain that's been registered, sometimes it'll come back with, information about the registered contact. So that'll include things like usernames or emails, or sorry, emails or phone numbers, kind of more information. Like this one even has the address, and then just the general location of where it was registered, and then this specific tool on the right here we're seeing is who is, and then the link is right there for who is domain tools. And then we also have reverse IP. So if you find an IP rather than a specific domain, you can kind of look up that IP, and then it would lead you to maybe a specific domain. Next, we have subdomains. As I mentioned earlier, these can be kind of like different websites that are attached to that parent kind of domain. So here in the example, we can see we have like a VDI, Le Bonbon Croissant, and then a warehouse Le Bonbon Croissant. And these would be connected to the parent domain of Le Bonbon Croissant. So this is just kind of other things you can look for that kind of might have some more exposure. If you can't find really much on the main like parent domain, you can look at the subdomains and see if there's a exploitable path there. Moving on to Nmap, I think, um, or many of you might be kind of exposed to this already, but this is really, kind of the first step of doing, penetration test engagement, especially in competitions like CPTC. This is like one of the first things, if not the first thing that we actually do. And we can kind of break down the usage here. So starting off, you obviously run your Nmap, and then you want to input the IP or IPs of the targets that you're going after. And then TACP would be, a specification of a port. I believe if you just leave it, uh, just Nmap no port specified, it'll scan, I think, like the top 1,000 most common ports, which can be useful in some cases, but a lot of times you probably want to avoid that because um, you might be missing information if you're only scanning for 1,000. So to do all ports, it would be something like this on the right here, the TAC PTAC, and that would probably give you more information, especially if they're running some service on one of those higher ports that might be missed if you don't include that. Next, we have SV, which kind of checks for versions of the services that are running on that machine. And this can be very helpful because a lot of exploits are tied to specific versions. So if you find, some FTP service is running on some specific version, and then you go look that version up on, say Google and look for like exploit, you might be able to find a proof of concept of an exploit that someone already has published, and then be able to get access that way. So definitely that one is very useful. SC runs default scripts on Nmap, which can help you gather other information, but at least in my experience, this has been pretty hit or miss. But it definitely doesn't hurt to run. Um, So an example of default scripts would be like, I think sometimes it gathers like an SSH public key, which can sometimes be helpful, but in my experience, I haven't found it. Um, or some other information about that service that is running on that machine. And then we have kind of the speed ones, which is min rate, can set a value of like 5,000, and this will send like 5,000 packets per second. And this kind of just lets you choose what speed you want. T is also a speed kind of flag. Um, I think by default, Nmap will run at T3. And then if you want to go lower, this is mainly for kind of evading detection. And then if you go higher, I usually use T4. That's probably what I would recommend. But if you end up using T5 or are considering using T5, just be wary that these faster scans can probably come back with missing information since it's going so fast. So you might be missing some valuable information if you go with those super faster, those more fast ones. And then here's an example of weaponizing the information that we gather. This is kind of like the example that I talked about, but here we can see the Pro FTP is running version 1.3.5. So if we just look up like Pro FTP 1.3.5, we can find an exploit on it. And then here's exploit DB, which I'll be touching on in the slides. Let me go back in the next coming slides. So moving on to exploitation. Um, some of the things that are good for finding ways of exploitation is Metasploit, which is a framework that comes pre-installed with Kali. It's kind of like it holds many exploits for initial exploitation as well as post-exploitation. Some examples that I've used is like the zero logon is on Metasploit, as well as the Eternal Blue. And then there's a lot of other ones that you can use. And then there's also MSF Venom included, which kind of helps you with payload generation if that's something that you need. Another big one is GitHub, and a lot of you may know already that GitHub is kind of like a platform that stores code and like open source projects. But a lot of like either researchers or just people in security might publish their own POC that you can use on machines. So if you find that uh, some service on a box that you're trying to target is running some specific version, sometimes you can look up like CVEs tied with this specific version, and then maybe look up that specific CVE and then look for GitHub POC, and then you can actually use their code that kind of helps you exploit that. Another good one is exploit DB, which I covered on the FTP 1.3.5, the Pro FTP 1.3.5 example. Um, is similar. It has public exploits that you can use. Um, and yeah, it's just a big database for exploits that are kind of public, and you can look for ways of exploitation in that. Here's an example of the .NET Nuke cookie deserialization RCE. This is kind of like a use for Metasploit. We can see it might ask you for certain settings for you to tune, like setting your listening host, your listening port, and then your remote hosts. And then after all your settings are configured, it'll usually just be like a run command here, and then sometimes it'll give you a shell. The exploit might not, but in this case, this is RC, so it will. And then we can kind of see that shell spawn right there in the bottom where it says Meterpreter. And then the first command we see running here is get UID. It's kind of like a who am I, like um, tells you what like user context you're running under. And here we can see we're a network service account. And then the next command being ran is get service or get system, sorry. And then as we can see, the result of that is, I guess the interpreter has some built-in like functionality of running some exploits while on the machine already. But I definitely wouldn't rely on getting system that easy. Um, so just have that in mind. And then post exploitation. So this is once you've actually exploited and you're on the machine. Um, there's kind of like a need to gather more information. So you might be running, some of those previous cyber kill chain steps that we mentioned before. So you're looking for ports, services, and software on that machine, and any misconfigurations that you can um, kind of use to map out your attack surface and see how you can get to that privilege escalation stage. Um, So some tools that are good here for Windows, we have Bloodhound, which is really good. It can map out kind of some attack paths for you if you can get that information into digested into Bloodhound. And then we have WinPeas and LinPeas, which kind of look for um, security flaws locally, so you can kind of local privilege escalate. And then we have privilege escalation. So you're kind of using that recon and information that you've gathered and weaponizing it to look for any potential chance to get root or system on Windows or domain admin, whatever the case may be. And then looting, looking for credentials, sensitive files, and database information. You can do this by, I know Windows, you can dump like credentials, whether that be hashes. You can look through like file shares, looking for sensitive information, and then as well as database information to help you kind of get your way into a database and access even more information. So on privilege escalation, for specifically Linux, you're looking at kernel exploits, sudo, weak permissions, cron jobs, looking at things that are kind of running in the background, uh, and kind of figuring out ways that you can exploit that to kind of work in your favor and help you privilege escalate. And we have environment variables, shell features, and then SUID and SGID. And then on the Windows side of things, we have service permissions. You're looking at things like auto runs, registry permissions. You can use token impersonation, insecure privileges, DLL hijacking, and kernel exploits as well. Moving on to lateral movement, we have pivoting, which is kind of moving from one device to another, which and reused or looted credentials. So using some of those things you've gathered on that machine, um, so whether that be credentials that you can potentially reuse on another machine. And then we have tunneling, which is enabled access to hidden devices. So sometimes you might run into cases where you get access to a machine, um, and that machine can't necessarily access other machines on the network, whether that be due to a firewall being in place. But you can try to kind of get access. You can kind of do recon on each machine that you're going through. That's why it's really important. And sometimes certain machines can access uh, machines on that network that other machines can't. So tunneling comes in clutch because you can kind of tunnel your traffic through that machine that can reach it and then kind of do your exploitation through that. And some tools for that can be, I like Legolo, but you can also do it through things like Metasploit or any C2 of your choice that has that functionality. So here's kind of an example of tunneling. Um, from the previous like firewall example that I mentioned, we can see that attacker one can't access this attacker or this machine three that we have on screen due to the firewall being in place. But if an attacker can compromise machine two, then they would have access to that machine three. So you can kind of tunnel your traffic through as the attacker through that second machine, and then still be able to reach that machine three. And then um, some of the tools that you can use, as I mentioned before, for tunneling is Chisel is another one I didn't mention, and then Legolo, and then an EC2 of your choice. It's something like Cobalt Strike if you have access to that. or there's a lot of other ones like Adaptix is a good one. But yeah, so those are some of the things you can use to actually get tunneling working yourself. And then finally we have our lab, which is kind of like the homework for you guys. Um, so if you haven't already done it, we have Bandit over the wire. Here's the link. And then we want you guys to try to finish up to level 20. You can use any resources with the exception of guides, so don't immediately go for a lookup or for write-ups and trying to find the answers right away. And definitely be good about taking notes and kind of try to explain your thought process through all of your steps, why you took those steps, what was the goal in taking that step, and then kind of do like a mini report write up of your own on levels 1 through 20. And feel free to finish the entirety of the Bandit game. And if you've done that already, we have some alternatives. So an alternative to doing Bandit, if you've already completed it, we want you guys to do Hack the Box, the starting point, which is kind of like the beginner levels. And we want you guys to do one box per tier. I believe there's tier 0, tier 1, and tier 2. So if you guys can do one box per tier, if you, I think you might need to finish the boxes on tier 0 and tier 1 to move on to the next tier. But once you get to tier 2, feel free to just do one box. You don't have to do all of it. And in addition, if you've already done those ones, we have an alternative. So you can DM myself or one of the other CPTC members, and we'll give you a Hack the Box active box for you to kind of go through and do a write-up on. And yeah, that kind of concludes today's session for CPTC. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask um, either now or you can ask any of the CPTC members through um, like Discord DM.
Hi. So could you go over the reverse proxies or whatever for I forgot what side it was, but for the what was it, lateral movement? And how can proxies how can you set up proxies if uh if you have access to a current computer and you don't have access to another computer? Like what proxy would you use in a network to do lateral movement?
Uh, you can kind of set them up. I know there's like SOX proxies where you can kind of tunnel your traffic through a client and a server that you're hosting on like the attacker. SOX proxy is usually hosted on like 1080, like port 1080, and you can kind of get a client and a server, so kind of have that communication flow once you get access to a certain machine that has access to those other machines where you can kind of and you can use that client and server to tunnel um, like to point your traffic towards so you know you can hit that machine.
So are you saying that normally stock proxies on what port 80 or
What's 1080?
whatever or
Yeah.
1080? Are you usually saying that SOX proxies on those ports have like elevated privileges that can go to
Oh,
other computers?
it's kind of just that getting that communication between those machines where you're kind of tunneling your traffic through that SOX proxy. Usually with like SOX proxy, you'll have like a client and a server, and you'll have or you'll usually be running the server and then the client on that machine that you want communication with, and then you'll tunnel your traffic through that SOX proxy so you can be able to kind of communicate with that machine that might be blocked by some sort of firewall or
Okay, and then what specifically is a proxy chain? Is that a special terminology?
I'm not too familiar with proxy chains. I don't know if one of the other CPTC members is. I personally haven't used it. I usually use something like Legolo or C2 or Socks. And if nobody
Okay,
else,
in the Golo, what do you typically do?
for Legolo, it's usually kind of like I want to say like a mini network, which is kind of cool because you can use ping. So you have like your Legolo client, and then you'll have your Legolo server. So you set up your Legolo server on your attacker machine, whether that be like your Kali. And then once you get access to a certain machine that has access to those like hidden boxes on the network, you'll put like a Legolo kind of client executable on the that machine that you've compromised and have access to, and you kind of use that to communicate with the other machines that are kind of out of your reach from your current standing, but that compromised machine has access to. So you'll put a client on that compromised machine that can reach back to your Legolo server on your attacking host.
Okay, so basically setting up a proxy, and the
Mhm.
Golo makes it easy to do so.
Yes.
And then your Windows, right? You're a Windows lead.
I'm not sure. We're not too sure on the roles yet. But last year I was a Windows lead or a Windows
Mm.
team member.
Okay, so could you go through the privilege escalation slide with the Windows logo pointing to every uh yeah, so, which one are you most familiar with, and what shows up in competition?
To be honest, I haven't seen any like kernel exploits or had felt the need to do like a DLL hijacking in competition. A lot of times, there is insecure privileges. Token impersonation is big with like Kerberos. I don't think I've seen like registry permission exploits come up in competition, but I know those are common, outside of competition. Auto runs, also really haven't seen it much in competition, but service permissions is also big in competition. So um, for the ones that I'm most familiar with, I'd probably say like insecure privileges, token impersonation. Probably those two are the biggest ones.
Okay, well, you said server runs is common. What's a server run?
No, auto runs.
Service run.
Or,
Oh,
or
auto
service
run.
permissions, sorry. Service permissions, and then there's auto runs, which I haven't seen much. Uh, like use case in competition where we're having to kind of exploit auto runs. But yeah, service permissions, um, token impersonation, and insecure privileges are probably the ones that I've seen personally in competition. But yeah, that's from like my 1 year I did last year.
Got it. Got it. All right. Thank you.
Mhm. Sorry, the chat was hidden from me, but Joe, I can answer your question. Um, is there a source where we can use as a reference for write-ups? Um, for like doing your own write-up on the things, or like um like you want like a reference for like a write-up to kind of look at to see what it, yeah, okay, like a format. Um, you can probably look up like a hack the box write-up. Here, let me find a good website.
Or send him the CPTC. Well, oh yeah, that works too. I think he's asking for like a finding block if he's gonna do hack the box.
Yeah.
So like the finding blocks, Anthony, do you got the link to the CPTC 10 repo? And there's a bunch of reports. We find that. Oh yeah, here it is.
But for like a write-up, I think a write-up would be different than like a full-on report.
I guess so, yeah.
Oh yeah, this would, yeah, something like this, if you can still see the screen. So make sure to definitely include screenshots of kind of the commands that you're running, and why, have your explanation why. Like what was the goal of running that and what were you trying to get out of it? Um, but yeah, try to be as descriptive as possible so we kind of know your thought process when we're grading these. Yeah, this one would be good. I guess if nobody has any other questions, that would conclude our week 2 session. But if you do like later on have a question, feel free to DM any of the CPTC members. We'll share the slides here, or you can just add us on the CPP public server. Um, yeah, that'll be the conclusion of this session.